Hey, how you doing? This is John, and welcome to John's Long Box. This is not my normal time, but we have to make do with our guest who's over in Great Britain. So this is a conversation with Adam Reeves. Adam Reeves is the creator of, oh, the lighting here is terrible, Trombone Man, the story of Don Drummond. How you doing? Welcome to John's Long Box. Oh, there's going to be a little bit of delay because of transatlantic nonsense, so it might be a little awkward at first until we get used to each other. How you doing? Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear, John.
Okay, good. Welcome to the show. How's everything going?
Great, thank you. Really good. Great to be here. Yeah, great to be live. That's fun.
Yeah. Are you nervous? Don't be nervous. It's comic book fans talking to comic book fans.
No, I'm not nervous.
So I just wanted to say, I've stumbled across your comic. I have a comic book on Kickstarter also, and I go to Kickstarter and I look for things and I forget exactly what I was looking for, and I saw Trombone Man. I saw it on Kickstarter, and I was like, I didn't read anything about it. I said, a comic book about ska music, I'm in, and I backed it. And when I got it, I put it right on top of my to read pile, and I absolutely loved it to the point I want to know, when is issue number 2 coming out?
Oh, when is it coming out? Well,
yeah,
it's going to be definitely next year, not this year, I'm afraid. Yeah, so this year's been kind of well, getting a comic off the ground is really, really hard work, especially if you're crowdfunding for it. So just the fact that you've got that comic in your hand at all, John, is an absolute miracle, I can tell you, because so much has gone into it. And to do this, I'm really gagging to get started on the next one. But we've got to do a crowdfund in the autumn, or the fall, as you would say. So kind of October time, we'll be doing another crowdfund. So I'll talk more about that later on. But once we've done that, I can start paying my artists to work on issue 2.
Are you gonna have the same
comics
team?
Are really expensive to make.
Oh.
I'm sure you know that, and I'm sure lots of you.
Yes, I'm
Say
making
that again?
my own comic right now.
Slight delay there.
I know we have a delay. We're going to be stepping on each other. I agree with you. Comics are very expensive. I'm making a comic right now, and it is just a lot of money. People, and I hope to help you fund your comic, because I want to know how this ends. So this is a biography of a real person. So how difficult is it? Like, one of the things you have the dialect or the accent. I always get my words wrong. The English that they speak in Jamaica in the 60s is a little different than the English that you speak now in Great Britain and the English that I speak here in the United States. So how did you do that?
So
we lost Adam. While Adam recovers, I will do this, and I'll make the comic big. He's talking from his cell phone from Great Britain. So he'll come back. He'll reset. So this is Trombone Man. This is Barefoot Boy by Adam Reeves and Konstantinos Pistorius. It's the story of Don Drummond, the Trombone Man. This is a biography. It's about a real person. Okay. And for those of you who don't know, Don Drummond was the trombone player for the Scotalites, a legendary Jamaican Kingston ska band, first wave ska. I hope Adam comes back real soon to correct me if I say any wrong information. Okay, Adam is back. How you doing?
Okay, so a lot of what you just said, the last little fraction of what you said, John, got quite mangled in the transatlantic fray. So I heard little bits of it. Do you want to just repeat your last question, and hopefully I'll be able to
I said
answer it.
That your comic, Don, it's called Trombone Man. I'll add this because this is really our third person in the conversation. It's called trombone. There we go. This is what I want to do. This is called Trombone Man. It's the real story of Don Drummond, a real person. So this is a biographical comic about Don Drummond, who was the trombone player for the legendary Jamaican ska band, the Scotalites. And I don't know if it's the same terminology over there, but we call this the first wave ska. Is that correct? That's what got cut off.
Yeah. I mean, it's, to me, it is. Yeah, it's ska. We don't really talk about first, second wave here in the UK, but yeah, it's the birth of ska. It's about the birth of ska, the dawn of the
Correct.
ska age. And
Right.
the Scatolites were pretty much the pioneers of ska. You know, they didn't. I don't know if they actually invented ska, but they were part of that era where it was given birth to, and hugely important. And Don Drummond was their trombonist, who was a troubled soul. He had some serious mental health problems, and I previously wrote a book on the Alpha Boys School. It's called Alpha Boys School: Cradle of Jamaican Music. I co-wrote that book with Heather Augustine, who's actually based in the US and is a ska kind of historian and critic and commentator, and she's an academic, I guess, and she wrote a book on Don Drummond in 2013, and we co-wrote the Alpha Boys School book together, and the two books are very much wrapped up in each other's story, because Alpha is where Don Drummond ended up. It's a school. It was founded and run by Sisters of Mercy, Roman Catholic nuns, founded in 1880, and was like a kind of shelter home, children's home for the poor, for destitute children originally. And then it became an industrial trade school, and it had a military marching band, which was meant to be like a feeder into the Jamaican military band, to, you know, for the army band basically. And it later became full of it, like the training ground for a lot of Jamaican jazz and later ska and reggae musicians. But that wasn't until like the 1930s and 40s, where literally dozens and dozens of jazz musicians came out of the school.
Yeah. Again, this is all information that I didn't really know. Yeah. So I did a video on your comic, and that's how you and I started talking. I've always liked ska. I've been a punk rock kid, New Yorker, you know, going to the CBGBs and everything like that.
Oh, right. Cool. Nice. Did you see the Ramones?
You know, I never saw the Ramones. They were the local band, and I was always like, I got a chance to see them. I got a chance, and I would see the other bands first, and then I never saw the Ramones. I met them all, hung out with them all, but I've never seen the Ramones perform. I much to my eternal shame. But I was big into the Clash. So the Clash was how I got into Jamaica. I mean, everybody in America knows Bob Marley, and you know, and you know, but the Clash would play ska music and Jamaican reggae music, and through them I started hearing about like Prince Buster, and then Madness broke on the scene back in the early 80s, and they were on Saturday Night Live, and I was like, this music is so different, and so I actively searched out. My friend John would get Prince Buster records and Scotalites and everything, so I always kind of was interested. But then in the I'd say around 2000, I dated a girl from Trinidad and Tobago, and you go to her house, her dad was playing all these records, and you know, and so she was like quizzing me. Oh, you think you're into ska? Well, listen to this. You think you're into ska? Listen to this. And to the point, I was at work listening to ska, and I was by myself. I'm a construction worker. I'm in a room. I'm bending pipe, and I'm in this room for like 2 months, blasting Jamaican ska. And these carpenters in New York are traditionally Rasta guys. They would stick their head in the door and they would look around and then leave. And an hour later, a different guy would stick his head in the door. And then finally, after 3 days, they realized I was the only person in the room. And they go, "Hey, you listening to the good jams?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's just me." They came in, they set up their shanty, and we were talking about music. They just didn't expect white Italian from New York to be listening to Jamaican ska.
Yeah.
I've been a fan.
Yeah.
And like I said, I saw your book and I was like,
Mm.
I got to get it. This is a no-brainer. I'm buying this book. So,
Well, people don't necessarily realize that like Bob Marley is just the tip of a very, very, very big iceberg.
yep.
Once you get below that iceberg of, Bob Marley and a few others, you realize there's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of artists, and they're all amazing,
Yes.
and really interesting. And there's a whole reggae culture, which once you kind of dig into it, it's kind of like it just sweeps you up, and it's sort of like you can spend a whole lifetime digging in.
Right. There's so many and so many songs. You're like, oh, I've known that song my whole life. I never realized.
Mm.
Like I would play this. My wife now is like, oh, I know that song. She's from Canada. She said apparently Canada has this connection with Great Britain, and ska was pretty big on Canadian radio too. But before we went live, you were saying that there was a whole movement where Jamaicans came to Great Britain in the 40s or so, and I didn't know anything about that.
Okay, so after World War II, Britain needed rebuilding from the ground up, and obviously we had all these British colonies, for better or for worse. But Britain had gone and colonized all these countries in the Caribbean and India, and so a lot of in 1948, the first Caribbean immigrants arrived by ship, a ship called the Windrush, and they're kind of known as the Windrush generation.
Oh, okay.
And they came to help rebuild Britain, and some of them were unskilled and some of them were highly skilled. A lot of nurses and doctors and whatever came to help to build our national health service. A lot of that was built by Jamaicans and Trinidadians and places like St. Kitts and St. Lucia and Guyana as well. And they brought with them their musical culture, and unfortunately, they were met with a lot of hostility and racism. They ended up in really poor areas, areas which are now multi-million-pound gentrified former slums, like Notting Hill.
Same thing happens in New York. The bad neighborhoods become a good neighborhood sooner or later.
Yeah. So, but they brought with them a lot of expertise on building big sound systems. So the sound system culture in Jamaica goes back to the 40s, where they were playing rhythm and blues in shops, in liquor stores and outside the front of liquor stores on these kind of bone shakers, these homemade speakers and amps that they would build themselves. They were really good at building stuff like that. And the migrant workers were going to work in the US they'd go for a season, and they'd come back with a whole load of rhythm and blues records, and they would sell them to these liquor store owners who had these sound systems, and the sound systems would sell a lot of booze because people would come for the music. And then they would move away from the liquor stores. They became too big to be contained just inside or just outside the front of a liquor store. So then they would be on a beach or in a yard or something, and then they would set up their liquor store, anywhere. And then these liquor store owners became the music moguls of Jamaican music. So they ended up. So people like Duke Reid, Cox and Dodd, they essentially, out of sheer competition and ingenuity, so they became like local celebrities. And then the competition was so high that it was all about exclusivity, like having music, having a song that nobody else knew. they would literally scratch the labels off, you know, the middle of the 7-inch single. They would scratch the name of it off so that you couldn't, you know, they'd be playing a tune, it would become associated with that dance. And they'd sort of send spies, the other dance would send spies to kind of check out the DJ. Well, what are they playing?
That's so cool.
So they'd scratch off the names to keep it a secret. So it was all very competitive. And then what happened was, when rock and roll came in the 50s, black rhythm and blues kind of died a death, really. Towards the end of the 50s, rock and roll took over. But the Jamaicans weren't really into this white rock and roll stuff. They didn't really feel it had the same oomph as the original jumping R&B. It wasn't as hard rocking to them. And I guess a lot of it was made by white people, so they just didn't connect with it in the same way. And so then what happened was, there was this period in Jamaica for a few years, and people don't really know this, but believe me, there's a lot of it was made, is that Jamaicans started making their own rhythm and blues. So they started making this kind of imitation jump jive R&B, but with really cool Jamaican accents. So strong kind of patois voices. And sometimes it's called Jamaican boogie or JA boogie. Some people call it shuffle beat. Sometimes it's called blue beat, but that gets a bit confusing because there was actually a record label in the UK that released this stuff. The record label was called Blue Beat, but Blue Beat put out a lot of ska as well, so it gets a bit blurred. But for a couple of years, Jamaica was dancing to its own brand of rhythm and blues, and it's really great. It's like, and some of it's instrumental as well, like trombones and saxes and stuff, no lyrics. But it's got a particular Jamaican vibe about it. And then out of that came the need to create their own Jamaican sound. So in the 60s, early 60s, they knew that their independence was coming from the UK, from the motherland. So it was going to be a big historical important moment, 1962. So they were searching for a uniquely Jamaican sound.
Oh wow!
And because they were already playing, they were playing this music which was like dumba 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 dumba, you know, like 12-bar blues, boogie woogie. But a lot of those tunes, both the American stuff and the Jamaican imitation version, it has this kind of offbeat that goes. So while you've got the rocking fourth, you know, the 12-bar and burn and burn and burn and burn, there's this underneath, there's this kind of invisible pulse, which is like but. And sometimes you get this guitar strike on that offbeat, so you can hear this all the way through, like chugging, going chinga 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 through the rhythm and blues. But when you drop out that 12-bar blues and just go ching 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 ching, you've got ska. That's basically what ska is.
It's so interesting.
But it's sort of mixed with a lot of other influences as well. So it's got all these other, because Jamaica is not a vacuum. So Jamaica had its own version or its own West African music, which came via slavery with traditional instruments, which is kind of muddled up with calypso a bit, because it sounds a bit like calypso, but it's actually called mento. And a lot of the mento musicians became ska musicians.
Okay.
So there's a natural influence on the music from
I could listen to this all day. This is so fascinating.
So a lot of the ska songs were mento covers, like old Jamaican folk songs redone as ska. But then you've got Cuba just over the water, so mambo was happening, big brass sounds, and a guy called Mongo Santa Maria was chucking out tunes week in, week out. So they would copy a lot of what was happening with mambo, and the brass sound of ska was really, a lot of that was influenced by Cuba. But then in Jamaica, you've also got more churches per square foot or square inch than anywhere else in the world, right? So it's a heavily religious Christian country. So there's a huge gospel element to ska as well. So a lot of the singers would have come from the churches. Everyone learned to sing in church in Jamaica. So we've got strong Christian gospel element. And then you've got the rhythm and blues element, and then a lot of jazz musicians as well. So Jamaica had this whole massive jazz scene going on. A lot of them went to the Alpha Boys School as well. So a lot of those musicians were really highly trained from when they were really young children. So they could sight read, they could compose, they could write music, they could improvise, they could arrange. They were really like the ones from Alpha Boys School particularly were they like raised the bar as far like the reason why ska, the original ska, is such good music. I mean, it could have just stayed like a localized dance craze, it's just within Jamaica, but actually it's world-class music because those musicians were world-class. So you've got all these great musicians who were into bebop, they were into Dizzy Gillespie and Sonny Rollins and people like that. So they were really smoking hot jazz musicians. So a lot of the soloing, the horn solos in ska are really, really good.
Yeah.
I feel like these are great musicians. So you've got the jazz, but then you've also got quite a few Trinidadian calypsonians were in Jamaica at that time as well. People like Lord Creator, who had a big hit with Kingston Town, Lord Creator, and who's the other one? I think Jackie Opel was from Trinidad as well. There was a handful of Trinidad singers as well who were bringing the calypso vibes. So there's this mashup of like calypso, mento, rhythm and blues, jazz, gospel, mambo, all of that makes ska.
That is awesome. I did not know any of that. Thank you. That was awesome. That is so. And now we got, go ahead.
Just to say that offbeat that I was talking about, that honk, that basically created its own musical revolution that continues to this day, because that offbeat continued into the rock steady era, which was just before it became reggae, and then into reggae. It's all about the offbeat in Jamaica. That's the whole of Jamaican music, is really that kind of inside out blues. Really, it's blues turned on its head.
Yeah, would you say that ska, and because when I say first wave ska, I usually say rock steady. Am I correct in saying that? Is that the right term?
Not really. No. So no. Rocksteady, it's its own thing. So the 60s saw this evolution of Jamaican music. Excuse me, it's better. So Jamaica went through this very fast evolution of music from the late 50s to the early 70s, and it was fueled by competition with sound system owners, all competing for new sounds. And when they hit upon something that worked, they would milk it for everything that it was worth. So they would find a groove. If somebody found something, it's like, okay, we're going to do that. We'll do that, and we'll do that. And so ska happened in around the late 50s. That kind of pulse started appearing, but it really didn't become fully ska until the early 60s. And then the Scatolites didn't form until 64, and they were only going for about 18 months. But they recorded probably 1,000 songs in that time or more. But what happened was, ska, really, the ska era, I would say, is 62 to mid 66.
Okay.
They say, I mean, I don't know how true this is. It's probably not true, to be honest. But they say that there was a really, really big heat wave in the summer of 66. And the ska, the youngsters were getting on a bit as well. People had been dancing to this high energy, bouncy music for, about 5 years. And they kind of was wearing a bit thin. And the music slowed down in 66. It just began to slow down. And that coincided with the arrival of the first electric bass guitars on the island. So ska is played with an upright bass, upright double acoustic bass. It's got like a like a jazz bass line. They switched the sound switched to rocksteady in '66. So the
Okay.
rocksteady era is '66 to about late '68, early '69.
Okay.
And what differentiates rocksteady is it has electric bass guitar, and it's really the first music in history where the bass is at the front of the mix of the music, like, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
this is, oh man, I could listen to this all
Yeah,
day
so
long.
it makes you go like this. It makes you just rock. It's slow. They slowed it right down. It sounds like, you'd hear rocksteady and you say, well, that sounds to me kind of like reggae, but the word reggae hadn't even been invented at this point. So for 2 years, 2.5 years, they were grooving to the sound of rocksteady, and ska pretty much died away. They moved on, and with rocksteady, it was an opportunity for the vocals to come to the fore. Where in ska, it was a lot of it was about the
Yes.
instrumentation. Particularly with the horns, the
Yes.
trombones,
Yes.
like
It was like a
and
party. Ska was like a
yeah.
party, musical party.
So rocksteady was very much influenced by Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. They were the big American band that everyone was listening to, and that three-part vocal harmony. So rocksteady was about that kind of really focusing on singing and beautiful songs. Some people who, well, I'm one of them, people who really, really love Jamaican music, some of them will say their favorite era of all of it over the whole sort of 50, 60 years is the rocksteady period. There was so many great, just sublime records made during that time, and they were churning out hundreds of records a week. So, it's like thousands and thousands of songs.
Right.
So the rocksteady era lasted for a couple of years, and it was written much slower than ska. And then around 69, it speeded up again, and it kind of started going a bit more like mento, like jinga 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 jinga. And the early reggae is actually quite fast. So reggae started coming in '69. It didn't slow down again until like 70, 71. And the whole Rasta thing didn't really get fused with reggae until a bit later. So the early reggae isn't roots reggae.
Okay.
Roots reggae came 71-ish, 72. Because Rastafarianism was much more underground at that point. It was considered like socially unacceptable and almost illegal. They were like outcasts. Yeah. So the Rastafarians in the 60s and 70s, they were literally like the police would stop them in the street and cut all their dreadlocks off in the street and throw them in jail. It was like that. They're serious persecution.
Yeah, I didn't know any of this. This is all fascinating to me. And you wrote the book, The Alpha Boys School. This is a novel or a
no, it's a historical book. It's called Alpha Boys School: Cradle of Jamaican Music. I haven't got a copy here to hold up.
Oh, well, I'm going to put the links in the description afterwards, and I'm ordering a copy. This is fascinating to me. Oh, we have a question.
It has 50 biographies of different musicians who came out of the Alpha Boys School. Some of them are jazz, some of them ska, reggae musicians. Some really interesting musicians came out of the Alpha Boys School. For example, a guy called Dizzy Reeves, who made albums for Blue Note Records. He's a jazz trumpet player. A guy called Joe Harriott is a sax player. Now, you wouldn't think of this necessarily, associate Jamaica with this, but free jazz is a kind of music. Well, the big joke about free jazz is people say, oh, the only people that listen to it are other free jazz musicians because no one can bear the sound of it. Kind of a lot of squawking, right? A lot of discordance. Free jazz, people think, the godfather is Ornette Coleman. But there's a guy called Joe Harriott who came out of Alpha Boys School. And like literally 5 years before Ornette Coleman, he was doing his own version of free
Wow.
jazz. He did a few albums worth of it, and he's now considered to be like the real pioneer of free jazz. And he also was one of the first, well, he was the first musician to fuse Indian classical music like sitar and tabla with jazz. He did a whole series of albums in the early 60s, like a world music pioneer. Came out of Jamaica, came out of this little school run by Roman Catholic nuns.
See, that is fascinating to me. That this Alpha Boy School is such an influential thing in music history, you know, and I would not have known about it if I did not stumble across your comic. Torchbearer Studios, who's working on his own comic, he wants to know what brought about the resurgence of ska in the 90s. Is that your area of expertise also?
I can tell you a little bit about that. So in the UK, what happened in the UK was the first revival of ska happened in what we call the Midlands of the UK, a town called Coventry, a city called Coventry. In the late 70s, the two-tone movement happened, which was a mixture of ska and punk rock. It wasn't really like ska punk, as in like hardcore punk, but it's definitely punk had happened in the UK a few years before. The UK is the only country really where punk went completely overground, where it wasn't just an underground thing. Punk was properly mainstream, exploded into the UK mainstream consciousness in the mid-70s. And then a few years later, because the punks in the UK were into reggae, it was not really, it was kind of all part of the same thing. It was all seen as rebel music. A lot of black kids were hanging.
Kids.
Working class kids, black
kids,
kids, white
the music.
out together. Yeah, and there'd been a long tradition of that. And so the two-tone thing happened in the late 70s, but that only really was for a few years. By like literally 82, the two-tone thing was fizzling out. And there was a little ska revival in the UK in the late 90s. It started happening again. Some new bands happened. But I think what happened in the US, getting back to the original question, I'm not sure what instigated the ska, the white kind of bands that's doing ska in the US, but I do know that it coincided with the Scatolites getting their act together in New York City. They regrouped in New York City, having split up in mid-65. They regrouped. First of all, in the early 80s, they did a little revival. They did a couple of albums, but then that fizzled out. But they properly regrouped as a live band around 87, 88 in New York City. Right. Took them a while to really like get touring and stuff. But a lot of those ska bands that formed in the States around that time in New York and on the West Coast as well, they all got to meet the Scatolites and tour with them, support them. And I think the Scatolites were very accessible. They weren't like superstars. They were just like, they'd all be hanging out together. And they would be very open to talking about, technique, how to get your sound right, all this kind of stuff. So these ska musicians who had been learning their stuff from the English bands like the Specials and Madness suddenly had at their disposal, they had the originators of the music, the
original band,
there and happy to share and talk with them. And so I think a lot of they were probably incredibly blessed to have that. And I think they learned to play. A lot of those early US ska musicians really got serious about music at that point and thought, okay, we got to learn to play these instruments properly like these guys do.
Yeah.
But as far as what made ska happen in the US, I'm not really sure because I wasn't there.
I remember it was, a kid from New York that was into punk. All of a sudden, Madness was the big thing, and then Madness was playing everywhere. And then through Madness, I heard about the Specials and then the Selector, and that was it. I was only listening to punk and I was only listening to ska for, I'd say, a good 7 years, and I was a kid who grew up on the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, you know what I mean? And you kind of, you kind of rebel against stuff and make your own stuff. And then like you said, it never really became the big thing. It was kind of like an underground, punk was still kind of underground, and ska, forget about it, was even less known. And that was like the weird kids. But it was so much fun. You go to see a ska show, it was going to a party. We didn't even care if we knew the band or not. We're like, it's a ska show, we're going. Because you knew the music was upbeat, you knew everybody was dancing, there was no fights. It was just like, and next thing you know, you're buying the records. I have so many like little 45s and EPs of bands I've never heard before or since, because it was just like fun. Punk was kind of dangerous. You went to punk and it could be like the wrong crowd. There'd be fights, but ska was always fun. And that I always have good memories of going to ska stuff. Want to make sure we get here's your link. This is,
that's me. That's my link. Yeah.
Yeah. That's Marcus. He's a moderator. He's throwing up your links. Make sure people. So go here to check out your comic and check out your book. I need to ask you then, what made you think about making a comic book about Don Drummond? Why a comic? Why not another book?
Good question. Well, so like I said earlier, I co-wrote the book on Alpha Boys School with Heather Augustine, and she'd written the book on Don Drummond. I didn't really enjoy the experience so much of promoting the book, the Alpha Boys book. Like, what I found was I'd go out and do these talks at a few reggae festivals and things, and I was like, I've done this. Okay, I did it for a year or so promoting the book, and I thought, I'm not that into doing this. It was like part of the story for me. Like, I knew I was doing something I really liked doing, like as in the book, writing about Jamaican music. But I felt like there was something else. And I think it just came as a blinding flash one day. Like Heather's book on Don Drummond, if anyone's read it, I mean, it's a really dark, murky story.
Yeah. I didn't know the story of Don. I read your comic, and your comic is mostly his childhood. So of course I had to go and read about his adult life.
Yeah. So this is issue 1. What we're talking about. So it's Trombone Man is going to be a series. It's a 7-part series. We've only done issue 1. It mainly focuses on his childhood.
Right.
But it came as a blinding flash, really, and it was like, I'm going to ask Heather if I can adapt her biography of Don Drummond. And to my amazement, she said, yes, I'll just check with my publisher. And the publisher said yes. And then it was like, oh shit, I better then do it. If I don't do it.
Now I got to do it.
I'm going to regret this forever if I don't do it. So it kind of was eating away at me. Like, well, how do I do it? I didn't want to go and sell the idea to a publisher and all of that stuff. I just thought, I can't be bothered with all of that. And they'll take all the money anyway and make me, and they'll compromise my artistic integrity, and they won't really get it. They won't get the story. There was a number of reasons why I didn't want to go down that road. So I thought, all right, I'm going to do it my own way, and I'm going to crowdfund it, and I'm going to ask the global reggae and ska fan base to get behind me and back me. And they did. We managed to fund the first issue, did the crowdfund in November 2022. It wasn't easy, but we did it. We got there because, like I said earlier, comics are really expensive when you're paying the artist. I've written this book, I've written the script, and I'm the publisher, but I'm not an artist. So I found this incredible Greek Cypriot illustrator who had dedicated himself to recreating the world of Jamaican music. He was doing tributes to Jamaican artists. He'd actually built his name's Konstantinos Pistorius, and he built the first reggae sound system in Cyprus 25 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And he was doing all these tributes. Yeah, so he was doing all these tributes to Jamaican artists. He was doing stuff for record labels and sound system groups around the world, posters and stuff. But he'd never done a comic. And I met him on a Facebook forum for now defunct record, a reggae reissue label called Blood and Fire, but it has quite a lively forum still. And I met him through there, and he was really up for it. And I actually travelled out to Cyprus to see him, and he lives sort of up in the mountains in an eco house on some land and grows
Oh
vegetables
wow.
and whatnot. He lives quite a rustic and alternative life, and we got on really well, became great friends, and we were like, let's do this. Come on, let's just make it happen. So we did, and we managed to raise the money for issue 1, and then we went into production together at the beginning of 2023. And I have to say, it was just working with Konstantinos was so much fun, because I would come up with these ideas. Can we do this? Can we do this? Does that work? And he'd be like, yeah, we can do that. I was like, okay. And then he'd come back with a sketch, and it would be much better than I'd envisioned. So there wasn't that thing of like an artist coming back with an idea, and you're like, it's not quite how I wanted it. Every single time, he'd come back, and I would just be thrilled with what he'd created.
That is
like,
awesome.
Oh man, this is good. This is really good. And so the energy between us was just always like lifting up, and we had so much fun, doing a lot of laughter, a lot of long discussions. I mean, every panel that you see, has been really dissected and discussed, and there's a lot of thought gone into it.
Yeah, a lot of emotion too. I got to say, I got emotional learning a story about a person. I didn't realize his troubled life. I've been listening to the Scottolites, since the 80s. I'm not going to lie and say my whole life. Since the 80s, when I really got interested in Scott through the Clash and the Jam and bands like that. But I didn't realize, of course, you don't realize what these people were characters and had lives and interesting lives, and what a short troubled life Don Drummond had. I really had no idea. This comic really inspired me to learn more about these artists, and Jamaica. Like I'm working on my own comic. I have a character that's going to be set in the 60s in the ska era. And now I don't want to touch it because I'm looking at the language that you use, and I realize people are just going to tease me or whatever. So I'm doing research because I want it to be authentic. I got a couple of guys at work that actually grew up in Kingston, came to the United States. They said that they'll check my scripts and everything. Like
yeah. It doesn't have to be, I mean, so I made an artistic decision to go for quite strong Jamaican patois.
But
patois, I just felt like
I couldn't think of that word.
Yeah, so I thought long and hard about it. I could have just written it in English with a few little patois inflections here and there. But then I just thought, no, I didn't want to patronize people. I felt like, no, people will get this. They'll get it. You'll start. What will happen is they'll start reading it, and then they'll start hearing it. You'll switch on a kind of auditory
faculty.
You'll start hearing the tones. And I remembered Clockwork Orange, and the book A Clockwork Orange has its own weird language.
Right.
And the American version of Clockwork Orange had a bibliography of words at the back.
Right.
But the UK version didn't. So it was just left to your interpretation. But I thought, Clockwork Orange did it. Why not just have a book where, okay, so if some people don't understand a few little bits of it and they're a bit baffled, you can work it out. I was so glad I did that. I made that decision, and most people have found it. It does have a bibliography of words at the back. And then what I found though was that when the Bob Marley film came out a year or so ago, that the makers of that film had been through a very similar thought process to what I'd been through in their decision making about the patois, and because other previous films about Jamaica, they often just water down the patois, and they decided that they didn't care if some people get left behind with a few bits. They thought we'd rather go for the vibe and get the authenticity. They had like 16 patois consultants on that film shoot,
Right.
something like that. And that's what I decided. I thought exactly the same thing. You know, if a few bits of it you don't quite get what they're saying, it's okay. In fact, there are a few. There's a few little bits that are deliberately confusing, which I just put them in for fun. So, for example, I decided to do a bit of magical realism. So you've got these. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. But you see the rat and the cockroach?
Yeah.
Can you see
what
that?
Page? I could bring it
the
up.
rat
What
and
page?
the cockroach are on a...
Yeah, I'll bring it up on, and I'll make this here. This page.
So yeah, the animals speak, and
Right.
they speak these really, really strong patois, like these old proverbs. They speak. Can you hear me? Okay.
You were cutting in and out. Yeah.
It's trouble's got a keep talking anyway. So yeah, throughout
okay.
there's
I can hear you.
these
It was
animals
just
that
cutting in
speak, and they speak these little old patois, old time proverbs, which are deliberately confusing. But I just did that for fun.
I have to say, when I first got the book and I opened it up and I started reading, it was a bit of a barrier. It was like, oh no, this, but it was worth the work. You know what I mean? Like I put effort into reading and understanding the difficult language, and I don't want to say halfway. I'm going to say like maybe 5 or 6 pages into the book, I'll bring up. I was really sold on it. Right here we have regular colloquial English, and then once they start talking,
transatlantic.
Yep.
I don't know how much of that you heard. Did you lose me then, John?
We lost you. So I was talking about the language of your. I might as well repeat what I said so you could hear. But when I first got the book, all of the captions were in, for lack of a better term, proper English that we could understand. But then once the dialogue kicked in, I'm not going to lie, I got a little upset. I'm like, I don't understand this. Oh my God, I just wasted my money and blah, blah, blah. But I was so interested in the subject that I put in the work. And I'm going to say about a quarter of the way through the book, I was like, he made the right choice. This is the way the people spoke. I got it. It was a slap in the face, but it wasn't an insurmountable obstacle. And I'm like, this was, I thought, a really good. By the end of the book, I'm like, there's no other way this could have been written. It was, absolutely was the right choice. And
thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad you said that.
But look at it this way: this is a niche book. You know what I mean? It's not a universally topic. It's on Kickstarter, so people who are backing it are interested in it. And you didn't insult their intelligence by giving them a watered down. Like, this is like, I know I'm gushing a little bit, and I'm fanboying up, but sometimes you got to do a little bit of work. And you asked us to do a little bit of work, and I was rewarded in that. I get a little annoyed sometimes when I see a movie from Scotland or England and they redub it so that Americans can understand it. But that's kind of half the fun. You brought up Clockwork Orange. Me and my friends, we decipher that. I learned that it was like bastardizations of Russian speak, Russian slang. And that's all the fun. You got to do a little bit of work sometimes. And you asked us to do work. And I think because of that, I got more out of it. So there's me gushing and ranting and raving about your book. So yes, you did the right choice.
Thank you. I am planning on having a Jamaican actor read the script, which will be available. They're quite, voiceover artists are quite costly. So when the
Yes.
budget's there, we're going to do a recording of the whole script so that you
cool.
actually be able to read it and hear it at the same time.
That would be really cool, because I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. You know, what I'm pronouncing in my head is probably not what is really. But I fortunately I work with, you know, they're going to be retired, so they're in the early 60s, guys who grew up in this area. You know what I mean? And I was showing them your book. You know, I didn't bring it to work because it'll get ruined, but I took pictures and I was showing them, and they were like, yeah, and they were explaining other things. Like, there's a couple of songs that I really didn't get what was going on, and they were explaining, like, Rick, the song Johnny Too Bad, you know, walking down the road with the ratchet in your waist. I'm like, what is, they were explaining that it was a German folding knife. So this tough guy was stuff that I just didn't know. And, you know, it was just, and so these guys were saying, yes, I recognize these words. They were explaining it. Like, you know, they're like, oh, is that how you spell it? Like, they didn't grow up properly educated, so they don't know how to spell, but they can build houses. They, you know, same with reading Train Spotting. Irving Welsh did a lot of the dialogue in the regional Scottish dialect. Yeah.
That's true. Train Spotting as well. Absolutely, 100%. And funnily enough, when I was searching for printers to print the comic, there was one printer who, they obviously wanted my business because they sent me some of their books, and they sent me this kind of very surreal Scottish Scottish noir detective comic called Bogeyman, and it's kind of a spoof of Humphrey Bogart, and it's all in very strong Glaswegian, and they'd made the decision to go full Glaswegian and have a bibliography of words at the back as well. And interestingly, a lot of the Scottish words are very similar to Jamaican patois, but then you had a lot of Scottish slave owners, so there would have been the Scottish influence in Jamaica in the way that they were learning to speak English, and the influence on patois. But yeah, that was interesting as well, seeing a Glaswegian, strong Glaswegian graphic novel, and it's very similar to patois, or
I gotta
similar
ask
in
you,
some way.
Are you a fan of comics? Like, did you grow up reading comic books, or was this just a bizarre choice to make? Like,
not when I was a teenager, which was probably the age to be into comics, but younger than that, I was into all the Snoopy, Charlie Brown, Peanuts stuff quite obsessively when I was like 9, 10, and I had volumes. I had like this many books. I used to spend all my pocket money on these Charlie Brown books, and I loved them. And I think they were the precursor to The Simpsons. You know, I really think that Matt Groening, he definitely grew up on Peanuts.
Oh yeah.
And we used to have these comics that you'd buy in the local like newspaper shop here. They were like called the Beano, the Dandy, Wizard Chips. They were like these real old English humor comics. Kind of, they were considered delinquent. You know, if you took them to school, your teachers would, they were seen as very low culture. So teachers would confiscate them off you, and they were banned at school. You know, what are you doing with that trash comic rubbish? But now they're considered kind of high art. You know, it's like they're seen with reverence. But then later on, so we had these very, very English comics. And then in the 90s or 80s, some guys from Newcastle had this comic called Viz, which was a twist on those old English comic books, with a lot of toilet humor and really politically incorrect humor. But somehow, like, they were being politically incorrect with a sort of politically correct filter. So they were kind of acknowledging their own political incorrectness, if you know what I mean. They were like, this is terrible trash, and we know it. We're sorry, but we're doing it anyway. And Viz really caught on because everyone had grown up with these comics, and they were like so similar. They looked the same, and the characters were the same, but just like really weird and surrealistic and bizarre. So Viz, I totally loved Viz, in, you know, a bit later on. But I wasn't one of those sci-fi comics kids. I never was into 2000 AD, which was a big one over here, or the Marvel DC stuff. Not really my thing. But I'm a big fan of graphic novels. I mean, I love just the graphic novel, long form comics. You know, I think that, you know, they've only just begun. You know, we're at the beginning of the graphic novel era now.
Yeah.
They've come of age. I mean, in France, they've been into graphic novels, comics. The industry is much more evolved in France and in Japan, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's really only spreading the idea that a graphic novel can be anything, any story can be told, any subject. You know, I read this book, The History of US-Iraqi Relations in the 19th Century, volume 1, 2, and 3. I got them from my local library as a graphic novel. You know, so I'm currently reading, actually, somebody I know drew the book. It's about the slave uprising in Haiti, or what was San Domingo, the first proper slave uprising revolution, and it's adapted from a play, from a theatre script that was long lost. So I'm reading that at the moment, which is incredible.
Yeah,
it's called Tucson.
What's it called?
It's called. I'd have to run upstairs and get the book and show it to you. Do you know what? Can I go and get it? Because I think this guy needs a plug. I'm just going to go and get it. Carry on.
I'll bring you down, and I'll bring that up, and I'll just talk about Trombone Man for a second. It has a very limited color palette, which I really, really appreciate. You know, I definitely believe in constraints and rules, and really forces you to do it forces you to become creative. You know, so I don't know if you'd call this pastels. I'm sure there's people who are artists and colorists in the chat that are cringing when I talk. And you know, when it goes into the modern world, it's color, and then when it's these flashbacks of his childhood, it's dark. But then I want to put this out. I want to show this. As he learns the music, the color gets brought into it, and it really, really works. Really, really works. So it's a combination of, see over here, he's playing music for the first time with a leaf, like a natural harmonica, you know, and even the person who gave him the leaf is like, wow, you know, you're picking it up, and you get the feeling that he's kind of like blowing a little bit of smoke, but then he realizes that he's not blowing smoke. The kid is talented. Here he is with his mother through these small like shanty town houses, and the kid's talking about how much he, you know, the kid, when I say the kid, I'm talking about Don Drummond. He's talking about how much he enjoys the music, and like you said, here's the glossary, Jamaican proverbs over here, Jamaican verbs, how to pronounce, a pronunciation key, and then you can see they have to hear a Jamaican voice reading in the script read aloud. So you could go there and have it read to you, which again, I would like to know, because I don't know if I'm pronouncing these. Crowdfunded with, I didn't even look at this. I wonder if my name is in here. I'll look at that later. Yeah, I don't want to bore everybody by looking at that, but I never looked through that. I just wanted the book. And he said this is 1 of 7. I need to ask when he comes back. Is it still available? Oh, he's back. Here you go.
I'm here.
I need to ask you: is this still available? Can people get this?
Yeah. I've still got copies, and I'm going to be printing more. So I'm going to keep it available because people are really loving it. And I'm doing like this art pack where you get some stickers. You get 4 stickers, 4 postcards, a sketchbook, and it comes with it comes with a downloadable 2-track single as well by a Swiss ska band called the Scatanauts, who are recorded in full analog sound. This guy's built an analog studio in Switzerland,
Oh,
and they
cool.
sound like the Scatolites actually. So you get a 2-track single as well. So you can just buy the comic on its own, or you can buy it with some other accoutrements. And you can buy a copy of my Alpha Boys School book as well.
And that's all
or
on
you can
Hearsay
download.
Media?
Yeah. And if you want, you can just download a free digital copy. That's available on the site as well.
And you said this is one of 7. So when you do 7 copies, are you going to collect it like a big graphic novel?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It will be a full-length graphic novel. So doing it as 7 issues is just my way of funding it.
Right.
It's just too difficult to raise. I mean, making a comic is like making a film. You know, it's like it's a lot of outlay, and so the only way I could fund it was by breaking it into small, manageable steps.
Right.
If there's enough budget, I'll make I'm considering making the issues a bit longer, and maybe we'll shrink it down to 6 or even 5, same amount of content, but I might do that. But it's just because that issue, even though it's like it's 39 pages of comic art, I think, you know, it cost me like, I won't even tell you how much it cost me, but
yeah,
let's just say the Kickstarter raised over £12,000, and all of that went in a flash. It's just gone on. You know, it doesn't last long when you're making comics.
Yeah, my crowdfund is over $6,000 and I'm just this close to breaking even. So yes, I understand exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. So what book did you get? Because of the delay, we're stepping over each other.
This was just given to me by the writer yesterday. It's called Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint. Oh, I'll pull it back a bit. Toussaint Louverture. And it's an adaptation there, but it's an adaptation of a play that was put on a stage in London. It's written stage production. You know Paul Robeson, legendary.
I'm sorry, but
black
you're
singer
breaking
from
up.
The 1920s and 30s. Okay. Paul Robeson was in the play, the original play on the London stage of this was based on. But it's I'll just show you some of the inside. It's about the Haitian slave uprising of the late 16th century. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah. Beautifully drawn. Highly recommended. Highly recommended. It's by Nick Watts, Nick N-I-C Watts, and Sakina Karamaji. That's his wife. That's what I'm reading at the moment. And part of Trombone Man is actually going to be set in Haiti as well. So I was intrigued to see Haiti, but because there's a chapter where the only time Don Drummond went abroad was when he went to Haiti on a tour. Things didn't go too well for him there, as you will find out.
Things didn't go too well for Don Drummond overall. Poor guy.
No. Okay, so for anyone's wondering, right, spoiler alert. Basically, Don Drummond, he went mad, for want of a better description. He descended into psychosis, shall we say, and he murdered his lover, who was a dancer, who was a rumba dancer, and they were like the celebrity couple of the day. Her name was Margarita Mafood, otherwise more widely known just as Margarita, the rumba queen. And he was declared guilty but insane, and he died in a mental asylum in 1969. Right. All of that information you find out in the first couple of pages, so it's not like a big spoiler alert. literally the first few pages of the comic, and that information is kind of widely known about Don Drummond anyway. If you speak to anyone about Don Drummond, they'll say, "Didn't he go mad and murder his lover
Yeah.
and die in a mental?" And you're like, "Yeah, that's pretty much the story." So
Are
it's
you,
a dark story, but I wanted to unpick what really happened, what really went on.
Torchbearer wants to know, are you going to be using the same artist for all 7 issues?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Konstantinos Pistorius. Yeah.
I love the art suits the story, and it suits the time, you know. So, and speaking of time, I have to get going now. I host my game nights on Mondays, and my friends are going to be coming over in a little bit. I got to clean up. So, is there anything that I did not bring up that you'd like to talk about before we go?
Everyone should listen to more ska. But people should check out the original stuff. People need to check out more Jamaican 60s ska and listen to the Scatolites. But when people check out the Scatolites, listen to the 60s stuff.
Yes.
And listen to Rocksteady. Everyone should go and check out some original Rocksteady.
I agree. I love it.
I know. I wanted part of my mission in doing this comic is to just bring.
Oh, we're losing you again.
Keep the music of 1960s Jamaica alive.
I don't know if everybody's going to be able to hear this on replay, but he's saying he wants to keep the spirit of 1960s Jamaican music alive. And I got to agree. It's such fun, positive music, and you cannot help it. I'm not a dancer.
Okay, we're back. We had a bit of a transatlantic delay there.
Yeah. I was saying I'm not much of a dancer, but you put on some ska music and you can't help but bop, and it puts you in a good mood. You know, it's such positive, fun music. And I guarantee you that you're going to be like, oh, I know this song. I've heard this song. Oh my, yeah. You've either heard that song or you heard another band cover that song. You know, they're almost like standards, you know, especially in the English speaking world. It's such fun music. And now, if I may be pretentious, through this Jamaican music, I've been following these like it's same with comic books. When I found out a guy drew this comic and wrote this comic, I follow them to the new stuff. I'm finding that there's like a connection to modern Ethiopian music, which I've been listening to a lot because let's face it, I'm kind of getting tired of pop music right now. How pretentious does that sound? But it's the truth.
Oh, are you listening to like Ethiopian jazz, like Mulatto Astange?
Yep.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I saw him play last year on the vibraphone.
Yeah, I'll put on like on Pandora, and you know how Pandora will float and you know and I find myself going, what is this? I never heard this before. And then I go back, oh, okay, you know, I didn't even realize I was listening to Ethiopian jazz. I just thought I was listening to something related to rocksteady or ska. But you know, I used to say, like, how could Pandora make anybody money? But I've been buying more records because I have a subscription to Pandora, because it's introducing me to other bands. I'm a big fan of it. You know, I'll put on music through an 8-hour workday, and I'm like, oh, that was a song, and I'll go back. That was the song I like. That was the song I like. And I find it's been opening up the doors to me to other stuff that I never would have paid attention. Yes, and Ethiopian food is delicious also. That I will agree with. When you live in New York, there's so many cool ethnic restaurants, you know, on the same block, you know.
Yeah.
So again, I have to get going. You know, we originally scheduled an hour earlier, so I got to get some stuff done.
Well, thank you for.
Oh, I'm a big fan. I love comic books. I love the music. This was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on the program and the show.
Oh, I would love to have you back. When you're promoting issue 2, come back and we'll have another talk. I think this is important. this, this is the kind of things that people who hate comic books, you could show them this and be like, look at this. Look at this. This is important. This is real literature. It teaches you so much. Musical history, art history, and then culture that is gone. Like I don't know how to speak this patois from 1960s. Geez, we're going on 80 years ago. It's lost to people like me. I think this is important. So please do come back. Please do come back when you have a next comic to come out. I would love to talk to you again.
Well, I'll be crowdfunding for issue 2 in the fall, in around sort of October, November time. So maybe we'll do another one then.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Just hit me up. Let me know when you're doing your full promotion tour, and and we'll have another talk. I would love it. I still got more stuff I would like to talk about. Thanks a lot, everybody. I'm gonna get going. All right.
Okay.